Going live and then checking the audio. 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 Maya, be quiet, baby. Going live and then checking the audio. Going live and then checking the audio. Maya, baby, you gotta chill a little bit. I'm trying to check the audio real quick. Hold up. Oh, okay, I hate the new Twitch mobile layout. Hold up. Gotta make sure I sound alright. Making noise. Making noise. Alright, that sounds like shit, but alright, that's yeah, it'll probably be fine. Okay. How do I go to just my chat? I hate this layout. No, I do not want to follow the link to my Twitter. God damn it. Okay, that's the channel Twitter I don't even use. Okay. I want just my chat here. Chat is the part I care about. Okay, alright. Hello, everyone. It's your boy, Warcrimes Uwu. I want to give a hearty hello to all of my gamers and well-adjusted people. Today we're doing our limited guide on the set Kaldheim. Kaldheim is the new sort of Norse mythology-themed Magic set. The limited format looks really nuanced and interesting. And I just want to give my sort of hot takes on what cards I think are going to be good, what cards you should snag up in draft, what cards you should not sleep on at pre-release, and how to sort of up your game for Kaldheim Limited by just watching this short video. So this is going to be our limited guide on Kaldheim. Let me make sure that I made everything the right size to show up correctly in the stream. I think I may have fucked this up. Yep, okay, hang on. We're going to go change the stream layout right quick. By getting rid of that. Hold up. Very professional stream. Alright. That should be good. Assuming I spaced everything correctly. Yes, awesome. Okay. So, quick recap on bread. Bombs, removal, evasion, aggro, and duds or dregs, just the bad stuff. So bombs are just cards that pretty obviously are going to change the state of the game, things your opponent has to answer or you're just going to win. So here we've got Goldspan Dragon, big creature that also gives you a lot of mana of different colors for later in the game. Kaya the Inexorable, generates a lot of value and has a removal spell stapled to her, and Vorinclex, big chunky boy that hits and has your opponent dead in like 2 or 3 turns. So these are the sort of bombs of the set. They're pretty easy to identify. Usually they're rare or mythic, and they are the cards that really attract you to those colors. There's not many uncommon bombs in this set, and the ones that are usually a little bit more build around. So we will cover them as they show up. So yeah, that's B. R is removal. These are the spells that you use to kill your opponent's creatures. Fairly self-explanatory. Getting rid of your opponent's threats is an important part because, really you're winning the game if you're the only one with a threat or if you have the more potent threat than your opponent. And removing their most potent threat or one of their most potent threats with a piece of removal is one of the best ways to accomplish that. So, keep removal at the front of your mind as you're playing through the set, and we'll go over some other pieces of removal that are more niche to specific archetypes as we go through the limited guide. Evasion is the next thing to make sure of. The most common forms of evasion are things like flying, unblockable, menace. Death Touch is kind of a form of evasion because they'll be unincentivized to block it, as is this ability on Icehide Troll, which gives it indestructible till end of turn, because you can just win a combat for free for 2 snow mana, oftentimes, and your opponent's not going to want to block that if they know that that's a possibility. So that is a form of what we'd call pseudo-evasion. But the menace that Draugr's Helm gives, either to the zombie berserker that you make, or just to whatever creature you equip it to, and the flying here on Mistwalker are just straight-up forms of evasion, not pseudo-evasion, just actual evasion. That just, by the mechanics of the game, make it harder for your opponent to block them. So these are things to look out for because they help you clean up gummed-up board states. So next we've got aggro. That's the next thing to sort of prioritize. And here we're just talking about creatures that let you take an advantage pretty early. You have Breakdown Berserker, 3 mana, 3/2 with upside. The upside being haste. Usher of the Fallen. Just a 1 mana 2/1 that can make more 1/1s potentially later. Nothing wrong with that. Definitely a good aggro creature. And Bloodski Berserker. 2 mana 1/1. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you put 2 counters on it, gains menace until end of turn. So it's actually aggro and evasion. So these are just good commons and uncommons to look out for that fulfill the A. And then there's duds or dregs. The D is just the bad cards in the set, the cards that don't really do what you need them to do, or they're not going to be able to consistently do something. So right here we've got something that shuts off non-land permanent cards in graveyards and libraries, which, maybe 1 or 2 cards in the set actually care about. Or Broken Wings, which destroys artifacts, enchantments, or flyers, which is like relatively wide, but you're still going to encounter enough decks that have none of those 3 things that the card will maybe be just a blank card in your hand, and you can never afford to have a blank card in your hand in Limited. And then Smashing Success destroys an artifact or land. Again, I think you're going to be kind of hard-pressed for this to be relevant in most games. You also get a treasure token, I guess, if you destroy an artifact this way. So these are the duds of the set. So this is stuff you generally do not want to prioritize in draft. You put it in your sideboard if you get it, or put it in your sideboard in pre-release if you're playing like a best of 3 event. It'll obviously be really good against some decks, but not stuff you want to put in every deck. And then I briefly want to go over the new mechanics of this particular set. So the first one is Boast, and this is an ability that will go on to creatures that can be activated only if that creature attacked this turn and only once that turn. So it's instant speed, but it is still stuck on your turn, and it's only if that creature attacked that turn. So sometimes in the case of Hagi Mob, you usually are going to be okay to attack anyway. It's unlikely your opponent's going to have something that can eat a 5/4. So the Boast is just a little bonus. You get to kind of snipe somebody. Axguard Braggart, though, it keeps getting bigger off of the Boast. So maybe if your opponent doesn't trade with it while they still have the opportunity to, it'll get out of hand. And then with Horizon Seeker, sometimes you're okay with trading with it and just activating the Boast to grab a basic land, which can be a snow land, to make sure that you have access to the plays that you need next turn. In which case that Boast is really more of an auxiliary thing. I've found that often these Boast creatures will pass the vanilla test, see Hagi Mob and Horizon Seeker, meaning that you would play it even if it didn't have the abilities. Its rate is pretty fair. But stuff like Axguard Braggart, where it's a really good Boast ability, doesn't have to necessarily pass the vanilla test to make it into your deck, because like Axguard Braggart, it's going to keep getting bigger. So yeah, this is Boast. The other new mechanic that we want to pay attention to is Foretell. Now what Foretell does is really unique. You can set the card face down in your exile for later, for 2 mana, and then cast it for its Foretell cost, which is cheaper. So on all of these particular examples, the Foretell cost is literally just 2 cheaper than the actual mana cost, meaning that you can just pay for the card sort of on layaway. This is not always the case. There are a couple cards where the Foretell cost is even more cheaper than the actual mana cost, meaning that foretelling it is generally how you're going to want to cast it. And then there's a few where the Foretell cost is about the same as the regular cost, but you get some bonus if you cast it with Foretell. So the cool thing about Foretell Unlimited is there's so many good commons and uncommons with Foretell. It's genuinely not really going to clue your opponent in what card you put face down. It's going to be hard for them to figure out what card you put face down. Whereas in Constructed, there will probably be 4 or 5 Foretell cards that are good enough to see Constructed play, and based on the state of the game, your opponent might be able to figure out what you're able to put down. But in this limited format, there's so many different Foretell cards, it's very hard to see. You're not really choreographing much by setting one face down, and you have a lot to gain by paying for pretty strong cards in installments. Like this Augury Raven's a 3/3 flyer for 4 mana normally, or Foretell for 2. Mammoth Growth is a combat trick that foretells for 1 and gives +4/+4, so, win a combat or just do much more damage to your opponent's face. That card's not awful. Doomscar Oracle is a 3/2 that lets you gain 2 life when you cast your second spell each turn, and you can make sure that happens pretty easily by foretelling this down and then casting the next spell. So Foretell is all about just sort of pre-planning, maybe taking a turn off to set some stuff down, and then having a more explosive turn where you cast a lot of spells for cheaper than you should be able to. So that's Foretell. And then Snow also is returning, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, but it's important to note that there are Snow basic lands, but you have to draft them. You can't just fill your draft deck with Snow basic lands. And then also, potentially in the place of Snow basic lands, there are tapped Snow duels with subtypes, which, will come up in Limited, but not unless you're playing a specific type of deck that really wants snow mana. So, with that said, these are some commons just to look out for. Just some commons that go, regardless of the archetype you're playing, if you're in these colors, these commons are going to be ones you're pretty happy to fill your deck with. So in white, we've got Bound in Gold, 2 and a white, Aura, Enchanted Permanent can't attack, block, or crew vehicles, and its activated abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So, one of the more restrictive sort of pacifism variants. It costs 1 more, but no activated abilities and no crewing vehicles. That's pretty good. And it just enchants a permanent. So you can enchant a Planeswalker and shut them down. You can enchant a land that has an activated ability if you're really scared of that, like a man land or something. You can enchant an artifact that has an activated ability. This has a lot of use cases. So Bound in Gold is definitely one of the best commons you can get in white. Beskar Shieldmate is a 2-mana 2/1 that when it dies creates a 1/1. So, it's a bear, sort of like it'll trade with bears and it'll leave behind a small body that might be useful later when you're like swinging out or when you've got to go wide like pump spell. So Beskar Shieldmate is definitely a common to keep your eye out for. And then Stalwart Valkyrie is another common to keep your eye out for. It's normally a 4-mana 3/2 flyer, but if you have a creature in your graveyard, you can exile that to only pay 2 for Stalwart Valkyrie, in which case it's an insane rate. A 3/2 flyer for 2 is amazing and limited, because just think about how few turns it's going to take for you to really whittle your opponent's health down with a 3-power flying creature if they don't have a flyer. So the Stalwart Valkyrie is definitely something to look out for. You're not going to be casting it on turn 2 and limited 99% of the time, but later in the game, you could be having a turn where you're playing this and a 4-drop, or this and a removal spell for their only flyer, if you're only casting it for 2. So Stalwart Valkyrie is very good. Next, we're going to go to blue. One of the most controversial cards of the set, Raven Form, just from a color pie stance, just pedantic nerds, not like from a gameplay perspective. But it has Foretell for 1. Exile an artifact or creature. Its controller creates a 1/1 blue bird creature token with flying. So, if you absolutely need a flyer, you can get rid of one of your tokens to get a bird. It's good that you can technically target yourself with this, but 99% of the time, well, probably not 99%, but probably like 85% of the time, you're going to be hitting your opponent's bigger creature, and, you're going to be doing it at a stage in the game where you do not really care that they have a 1/1 bird with flying. Or you're going to be hitting an artifact that, is much more much more able to be dealt with as a blue bird than it would be as the actual artifact. Maybe a powerful equipment or something like that. So Raven Form is going to be one of blue's better pieces of removal in limited. Lityara Kinseekers, I think the win state on this card, like the state where this card is good, is not as unlikely as it looks. Basically, when it enters the battlefield, if you have 3 or more creatures that share a creature type, so that includes just like one other shapeshifter and one other creature of any kind, because this is a shapeshifter, or just 2 creatures that share a type and this, because this automatically shares a type with it, given that it has Changeling. Then this comes in with a +1/+1 counter, and you scry 1. So, think about this as a 4-mana 2/4. 4-mana 2/4s are pretty bad. We usually don't take those in limited, but if you have 2 rogues out or 2 elves, or like in blue, it's maybe it'll probably be a different color or different card type. But there's plenty of other shapeshifters or changelings even at common, and you can pretty easily get this to work. And then it's a 4-mana 3/5 that lets you scry 1, which is really, really good. So I would look out for this and think about how its use case, or its like best case, is really not that uncommon. And next we've got Draugr Thought Thief. 2 and a blue for 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top card of target player's library. You may put that card into their graveyard. So whether you are trying to make your opponent's next draw worse or make your own draw better, like let's say you play this and you don't have a 4th land, but you have a kick-ass 4-drop, you might want to look at the top card of your library, try to make sure it's a land. And if it is, good, you got that peace of mind. If not, mill it, you have a higher chance of drawing a land, so you can cast your 4-drop. Or, your opponent's in top deck mode late in the game, you play this, try to make sure they draw a land. You get a little control. So I would say that this is like definitely better than scrying, because not only do you get to choose who you do it to, you could give yourself some graveyard synergy. I think Draugr Thought Thief is going to be one of the better commons in blue. I think you will always be pretty happy to have these in your deck, a few of them. So with black, usually most of what black is good at is removal. It's the color of removal. So we've got Wither Crown, really cool art here, by Miranda Meeks, which I don't recognize her name. She might be new to Magic art, so this is a really cool one. But it's 1 and a black for an aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has base power 0, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life unless you sacrifice this creature. So, If it's got an activated ability that they want to keep it around for, or if they want to keep it around to block, it is going to drain them every turn. Most of the time, they're going to just sacrifice the creature to Wither Crown, or if not, then it probably wasn't worth playing Wither Crown on. Wither Crown's just going to go on their big tramplers. They're evasive creatures. They're just big boys, just 5-mana, 5/5s, whatever else. That's what Wither Crown is best to hit, because, those are the things that they're going to sacrifice. And then you basically just killed the creature for 2 mana at sorcery speed, which is really good. Dogged Pursuit. If any of you played during Guilds of Ravnica, which wasn't that long ago, it just recently rotated, there was a card called Ill-Gotten Gains, or Ill-Gotten Inheritance, and it was 3 and a black for, at the beginning of your end step, or with Ill-Gotten Gains, it was your upkeep. Each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. And it had an activated ability for 6 mana that you could immediately drain your opponent for 4 and gain 4, which this does not have, but that card was definitely the best common in that limited format. It was the same cost, it just had that activated ability, and it happened on your upkeep instead of your end step. But I think in a way, Dogged Pursuit is even better because it does it the turn it comes in. You lose that activated ability, so that makes it worse. But the fact that this does it when it comes, the turn that it comes in, does it on your end step, is really relevant. And I think Dogged Pursuit is going to be one of the sort of staples of slower decks in this format that play black. Because you've got a clock. It's a clock. You're draining and gaining 1 literally every turn. It's clock. And you need clocks in limited. So Dogged Pursuit is definitely common to look out for. Any black deck, aggressive, controlling, whatever, is going to want 2 or 3 copies of this to feel very happy about their prospects of winning in the draft. So keep an eye out for Dogged Pursuit. And then Feed the Serpent is just kind of your basic 4 mana, exile target creature or planeswalker. Just, instant speed. You can look at it like Vraska. It's a strictly worse Vraska's Contempt, because Vraska's Contempt does this but gains you 2 life at instant speed. But, this is a common. And in any black deck, I think even aggressive ones, you're going to want a few copies of Feed the Serpent. It's just got so many different things that you can... It's just got so many different things you can answer with it. So, definitely a top priority. And the dog is eating a piece of gravel from the fish tank. Drop it. Drop it. Alright, she went under the bed, so we're going to have to hear that awful sound for the rest of the set review. Very cool. Okay, so red has Frostbite, which is a snow instant. 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If you control 3 or more snow permanents, it's 3 damage instead, and it costs 1 red mana. Love this art, by the way. But yeah, you basically don't think of this as the 3 damage. Just think of it as a shock that can hit a creature or planeswalker. You want those in limited. You want a 1 mana spell that answers their bear, so your turn 3 can be answering their bear, playing your own bear. You're gonna feel pretty good about that. Not much to say. Demon Bolt, 2 and a red, 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker at instant speed, and it's got Foretell for 1. So on a turn where there's not much happening, you can set this down, and then later you got like a Super Bolt, which is, really powerful. Demon Bolt is going to be one of the better pieces of removal at common for red in this set, I would wager. And then lastly, we've got Cinderheart Giant, just a big boy, just 5 and double red for a giant berserker with trample, 7/6. And when it dies, it deals 7 damage to a creature an opponent controls chosen at random. So, you're going to kill one of your opponent's creatures. It's an on-curve creature that when it dies, kills one of your opponent's creatures. This is not going to be doable without some ramp or some, cost reduction or just a really controlling game plan. But if you can make that happen, this is a good payoff, especially for a common. And then we've got green, the last color we want to go over, the sort of generic good use commons for Sarulf's Packmate. We've got the Pizza Rhino of the set. It's 3 and a green for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. And it's got Foretell for 2. So Pizza Rhino, this has Pizza Rhino stats. It has 1 less power, 1 more toughness, which means it can eat bears, which Pizza Rhino could not do, but it does not trade with bigger things like Pizza Rhino could. So there's some upside, some downside. But it's a 4-mana 3/3 that draws a card. And that Foretell is not irrelevant. If you build a deck that doesn't have a lot of 2-drops, but has a lot of Foretell cards, you're going to be sacrificing your early game, but in the late game, you're going to have explosive turns where you can play Sarulf's Packmate and whatever you drew off of it. So yeah, this card you're going to want a couple copies of in any green limited deck. Ravenous Lindworm is a 6-mana 6/6. When it enters the battlefield, gain 4 life. This is just one of your big dummies in a set. You need a lot of you need big dummies in your rampy green deck, and Ravenous Lindworm just fits the bill. And then same with Grizzled Outrider. He's riding a bear. He's so cute. He's 4 and a green for a 5/5 vanilla. So 5-mana 5/5. Usually you're pretty not super happy to have these, but you need some big guys. There's not too many good big guys in this set, and and the 5-drop slot, a Grizzled Outrider, can be really helpful. So yeah, those are the green commons to sort of look out for. Now we're going to look at some archetypes. White, blue, foretell. So these archetypes are just sort of to show you what to draft, or what to keep in mind when you're drafting, what kind of synergies you can play off of. And in this set, each color actually gets an uncommon legendary, each color pair actually gets an uncommon legendary creature as well as an uncommon saga. So that's something to keep in mind. So we'll start with white and blue. So Vega the Watcher is 1 white and blue for 2/2 flyer, legendary bird spirit. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. So they made this a little bit more vague just so that in other formats like Commander or something, you can build this guy and get something neat out of him with things like Flashback. But in this set, it's clearly meant to interact well with Foretell. So, you know, when you're casting one of your Foretell spells, draw a card. And draw a card is some of the 3 most powerful words in Magic. And then, of course, it's a flyer, so it's got some evasion, which is nice. Just a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, you're never going to be like sad to be playing that. But, you know, if you fill your deck with Foretell cards, a lot of which are good on their own, then Vega the Watcher can draw you cards. And if you're drawing even 1 card off of this, it's insane value. It's great. So, one of the Foretell cards I want to show you is God's Hall Guardian, which is 5 white for a 3/6 Vigilance. Not a great rate, but it has Foretell for 3 white. So, you know, you set it down early, and then you play a 4-mana 3/6 Vigilance, which is above curve. You just had to take a turn off earlier to get it. So, you know, you're going to want 1 or 2 of these in a Foretell deck. And then we've got Behold the Multiverse, which you don't mind casting for its mana cost, 3 blue, scry 2 and draw 2 cards. But if you Foretell it, then later in the game, you can be taking a turn where you are casting this off of Foretell, and you still have 3 or 4 mana, maybe even 5, left over to actually cast one of the spells that you drew. And scrying 2 and then drawing 4 cards, or drawing 2 cards, is going to go 3 or 4 cards deep in your deck. So if you're looking for something specific, Behold the Multiverse is more likely than just a regular draw spell to allow you to find it. And the other thing that's important is it's an instant. So if you draft any counter spells or just instant speed removal, you can leave them up and still be sure to be doing something with your turn, even if there's nothing worth playing your removal or counter spells on, because at the end of your opponent's turn, you can cast Behold the Multiverse, something that's not true of things like Divination that we get in most sets. So important to note there. And then there's also a Saga that boosts you off of Foretell. 1 white and a blue. Step 1, gain 2 life for each Foretold card you own in exile. 2, add a blue and a white, spend this mana only to Foretell cards or cast spells that have Foretell. Worth noting, you do not have to have Foretold those cards. You can just use this to cast cards that have Foretell. And then for 3, return target card with Foretell from your graveyard to your hand, so some recursion. So this is kind of trying to sort of pay for itself on the way. You know, it gives you back 2 of the mana you spent on it, so you can Foretell something. And then you get back something like a Foretell removal spell, which is huge. So Nico Defies Destiny is going to be something you're absolutely going to want in your Foretell deck. It slows you down considerably, but it also gives you enough value to really outpace your opponent in the late game, and I think that's what this Foretell deck is going to be about. So then we've got Iron Verdict, which is a Foretell piece of removal, almost like I foretold that. So it's 2 white. For an instant, deal 5 damage to target tapped creature, and it foretells for 1. So, you know, it's going to kill most things trying to attack you. And it's only 3 mana. And if you foretell it, you know, then you can do it for 1 later. You know, you imagine turns where you've foretelled a few things, and then, like, on your opponent's turn, you just counter their spell, wipe out 2 of their creatures, and then you untap on the front foot, able to just sort of cast something and kind of assert your position as being ahead in the game. And then we've got Karfell Harbinger, which is going to be pretty good for your Foretell deck. It's 1 blue for a 1/3 zombie wizard. Tap to add a blue. Spend this mana only to foretell a card from your hand or cast an instant or sorcery spell. So this is pretty, I guess I'd just say, like, open-ended in terms of what it can do. This can let you cast a 4-drop instant or sorcery, like that one that we saw on the previous slide on turn 3, which is not irrelevant if you don't have anything else to do. And also, it can just let you, so, you know, you play this on turn 2, turn 3, play another 2-drop, and then foretell a card. You know, because you can use this mana to foretell, so it kind of allows later in the game for, if you need to foretell something to get a synergy, or just because it's cheaper that way, this helps you sort of run that out without sacrificing what you want to do with the rest of your turn. So this is the blue-white foretell archetype. Overall, it looks pretty strong. I would say this archetype also has the strongest rares. There are a lot of good rares with Foretell in white and blue, and I don't show rares in this because I think a good drafter or a prepared drafter should be able to draft a good deck that doesn't have any rares in it. But that is not to say, of course, that if you get the white or blue Mythic, both of which have Foretell, that you shouldn't play them. You should obviously play them. If you get Nico, you should play him in this deck. Play them in this deck, my apologies. Or if you get, Doomscar, you should put it in your limited Foretell deck. But you can make the deck without rares. You can make any of these limited decks without rares, and don't think when you open your pre-release pool that just because you got 2 rares in a specific color pair, that color pair is going to be your most robust option. That's a huge pitfall in pre-release. But with that said, white-blue Foretell looks really strong. So next we're going to move on to blue-black Snow Control. This one looks interesting. So the legendary that was given to this archetype is Narfi, Betrayer King. This guy is 3, a blue, and a black for a 4/3 legendary snow creature, zombie wizard. Other snow and zombie creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can pay 3 snow mana to return him from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if he goes in the yard, if you've milled yourself or your opponent's milled you and he's ended up in the yard, or if he's just died, if you have 3 snow mana, which is a little hard to do in limited, I get that, but if you have 3 snow mana, if you've made that happen, you can bring this guy back tapped just every turn. They kill him and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I got 3 snow mana. Narfi's coming back. And it's just going to happen. There's not much they can do about it short of trying to exile him. So he's an awesome thing to look out for if you are able to prioritize getting snow mana, snow lands in your pool. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back and we'll talk about Pilfering Hawk. Sorry about that. Alright, so Pilfering Hawk is 1 and a blue for a 1/2 flying snow creature bird. You can pay a snow mana, tap and draw a card, then discard a card. So I think the big reason that this is on the list here for me is because it's fine even if you don't have any snow lands currently. You'll want to draft 1 or 2 snow lands so that you can activate this ability when it'll be relevant, but a 2 mana 1/2 flyer is not the end of the world. And you don't actually, for these snow cards, you don't actually have to spend all snow mana to cast them. I hope you're aware of that. But Pilfering Hawk, it's just a little flyer, which you're going to need a few of those in your deck. And then later in the game, it can filter if you have snow mana, which is really important. And then we've got Priest of the Haunted Edge, 1 and a black for an 0/4 zombie cleric. Tap and sacrifice it. Target creature gets -X/-X till end of turn, where X is the number of snow lands you control. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So you're going to want to draft 4 or 5 snowlands and maybe some ways to grab them. But it's not far off to see this guy sacrificing himself to give an opposing creature, -3/-3 or -4/-4 later in the game. And I think that this guy is a decent piece of removal for the snow control deck. And then we've got the Trickster God's Heist, which doesn't have anything to do with snow, but it's a good control piece, so I'm showing it off here. And I wanted to show off all the sagas because they're sort of, the signpost uncommons are really important, really telling in terms of what each color pair wants to do in limited. So for 1, you can exchange control of 2 target creatures. For 2, you can exchange control of 2 target non-basic non-creature permanents that share a card type. So 2 non-basic lands, or 2 artifacts, or 2 enchantments, or 2 planeswalkers, which that's not really going to happen in limited, but the other stuff is potentially relevant. And then for 3, target player loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. Nothing wrong with that. Just drain your opponent for 3. So this card is going to be fine, especially if you have a way to make like 1/1 tokens of some sort to trade your opponent for their best creature that they have out. And then you've got Bergstrider, 4 and a blue for a 4/4 giant wizard. It's a snow creature. When it enters the battlefield, tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls. Playable already, but if you spent a snow mana on this, then that permanent doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So, this goes from a 5 mana 4/4 with a little bit of, aggro potential in terms of tapping down one of your opponent's things so it can't block, to something that disables a creature for a turn and a half. Going into your opponent's turn, going into your next turn, you get to attack again, and that thing doesn't get to attack you. And it's not hard to, especially at the stage in the game where you're casting 5 drops, have 1 snow mana to spend on this. So Burger Strider's up there. And then we've got Hailstorm Valkyrie. Now, Hailstorm Valkyrie is one of your cards that's hopefully going to be winning you the game later. It's 3 and a black for a 2/2 flying trample, and double snow gets it +2/+2 until end of turn. Now, double snow's not super hard to get. Quadruple snow to activate this twice is pretty hard to get in limited. But, just having 2 snowlands out, or having the snowland and the ring that taps for snow mana out, will allow you to make this Hailstorm Valkyrie definitely activate once at least. So, Hailstorm Valkyrie, you can often think of it as a 4 mana 4/4 flyer with trample, and I think that's pretty great. So next we're moving into Black-Red Sack Aggro. Black-Red is one of the color pairs in this set that doesn't feel like its identity is super fleshed out. But I tried my best to highlight the cards that sort of make this engine tick as best I could. So when Carder Doomscourge, which is a 2-mana, Carder Doomscourge, Jesus, is a 4 mana, it's 2 a black and a red for a 4/3 legendary demon berserker. When it enters the battlefield, until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. That's a commander thing. There's not really any multiplayer potential in limited, other than Two-Headed Giant, which this wouldn't affect. And whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So that includes Carder, but that also, that's intended, like, your opponent has to swing with all their creatures, you get to eat them with your bigger creatures, and then drain your opponent a little on top of losing their creatures. This guy is really strong, probably one of the stronger signpost uncommons in the set, just given that, like, you play him and your opponent basically either has to use up a combat trick or let him eat a bear, and let maybe one of your other creatures at least trade advantageously. You really get control over how trades are going to go the turn after you lay this guy down, which is pretty exciting, pretty good. Next we've got Village Rites, which is 1 black for an instant. You have to sacrifice a creature and draw 2 cards. There's a lot of ways to make crappy little tokens that you wouldn't mind sacrificing to Village Rites, and there's also some creatures that do cool stuff when they die. So Village Rites is just pretty okay here. At instant speed. You can also just hold it up until your opponent tries to remove one of your creatures, and then sack it in response with Village Rites, so that you get to draw 2 cards off of it instead of it just dying to whatever your opponent was going to play. So generally pretty good to play in limited. Fearless Liberator is 1 and a red for a 2/1 with Boast for 2 and a red. Create a 2/1 red Dwarf Berserker creature token, and this is also a Dwarf Berserker. It's not hard to imagine a world in which you swing with this on turn 3, like you play it on turn 2, swing with it on turn 3. Your opponent blocks, you just make a new one, and this trades with whatever it blocked it. So, you trade with a bear, you leave behind a 2/1, you just had to spend some mana for it. Not terrible. Also, just cool in a deck where you have a good sack outlet, and you can, attack and make a dude and sack that dude pretty quickly. So Fearless Liberator is not too bad for a 2-drop. And then we've got this sort of sack payoff here, Carder's Vicious Return. 2 a black and a red. Step 1, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, Carder's Vicious Return deals 3 damage to any target. So, you're thinking these Dwarf Berserker creature tokens that you're making, those are good things to sack. There's a few ways to make 1/1s in several different colors, those are good to sack. Step 2, each player discards a card. This one's a little awkward, but if you're playing an aggressive deck, you can possibly get Hellbent before this activates and make it so your opponent's the only one who actually has to discard a card. And then step 3, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on it. It gains haste until your next turn. So that's kind of the nutso part here. You get to reanimate something. Maybe it's the thing that you sack to step 1 in the worst case scenario, or playing this very late in the game, maybe it's something that costs more than 4 mana, and then you're just getting all kinds of free stuff off of this. This honestly feels like it should have been a rare saga, but it's uncommon, and it's kind of the reason to play red and black. This is just such a value card. This really screams Eldest Reborn to me in terms of all the things that it allows you to do. And then we've got Turgid's Shadow, 3 double black, or Foretell for 2 double black, so the Foretell isn't giving you that much of a discount. You're usually just going to cast this for its mana cost, but it's an instant. Each player sacrifices 2 creatures. I could see a world where you're spending your first few turns just foretelling cards, so that you can cast this and your opponent's the only one who has to sacrifice creatures, and then you start actually playing stuff after that. Because this doesn't have to be two-sided. You don't have to have two creatures to play this. You can just do it if you have one creature or no creatures, and then just your opponent is sacking two creatures for 5 or 4 off of Foretell, which is really good. So this is definitely something to keep an eye out on. But also, if you just control like 2/1 Dwarf Berserkers, then you're getting to just you're not sacking much, and they might be sacking like their 4-drop or the things that they actually plan to play on those turns. I know we've got Dwarven Reinforcements, which is 3 in a red for a sorcery. Create 2/1 red Dwarf Berserker creature tokens, and it foretells for 1 in a red. Not much to say there, just makes you two dwarves, which you could sack later if you wanted. So next we've got red-green ramp and big boys. So there's not much of a theme in red-green, but just lets you kind of ramp and make big boys, which is, at the end of the day, that's what Magic is about. So Svella, Ice Shaper, is 1, a red and a green for a 2/4 with a lot of abilities. Legendary Snow Creature, Troll Warrior. Pay 3 and tap. Create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Manalith with tap, add 1 mana of any color. So you can make mana rocks with this creature, which this is often gonna be a pretty relevant ability. You block with her, you make a mana rock. And then next turn, you're just ramped a little bit. And that lets you lead up to her big ability, which, usually you're going to be using these mana rocks to just cast bigger spells, or she's going to die after making 1 or 2 mana rocks, or before making any, if your opponent assesses her as a threat. But, if you somehow get to basically 8 mana while you've got her out, you get to pay 6, a red and a green, and tap to look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this isn't really going to get you something for cheaper generally, because you're not going to be playing a lot of things that cost more than 8 in a limited deck, let alone more than like 6. But every turn, without having to actually have a card in your hand, you can grab just hopefully something big off of the top 4 cards of your library. 4 isn't that deep, so sometimes you will whiff. You'll get like a 2-drop, or you'll get. I don't think you'll often get nothing, but sometimes you will whiff. But if you're in a state of the game where you have the luxury to be activating that second ability, you're probably in a good spot, and getting like Rootless U, or even just like the Pizza Rhino, the 3/3 Pizza Rhino off of that will probably be enough to solidify your advantage. So pretty good card, good one to look out for. Haggy Mob is one of the sort of big boys that you can ramp into. It's 4 in a red, 5-drop, 5/4 Troll Berserker, and it boasts for 1 in a red, deal 1 damage to any target. And the reason that this is here is because there's actually a lot of 1 toughness creatures in this format. There's several ways to make spirit tokens, bird tokens, 2/1s. This kills the 2/1 Dwarf Berserker creature tokens. This kills the 1/1 human tokens. There's a lot of stuff that this boast kills, and worst case scenario, if it doesn't kill anything by itself, this can trade with 6 power or with 6 toughness creatures. You can just hit your opponent in the face for 1. And remember, this boast ability can only be activated once per turn, so you can't like swing on turn 6 and then do the boast ability 3 times, but you can do it once. You can and you can do it before blocks too. Like if they've got like a few different blockers, you can swing, activate the boast to kill their 2/1, and then they have to think a lot harder about how they're going to block you. Or they can block you, and then you can boast to finish off one of the creatures. It just makes combat very awkward when you have an extra 1 damage. You can shoot wherever afterward. So Haggy Mob is going to be a pretty good common. We've got Rootless U. 3 in double green for a 5/4 Tree Folk. When it dies, search your library for a creature card with power or toughness 6 or greater. Reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is power or toughness 6 or greater. What immediately comes to mind is that Lindworm, the 6 mana 6/6. You gain 4 life when it comes in, which is at common. So you can easily make sure you've drafted 1 or 2 of those, and you can grab them with Rootless U. But there's several things with 6 or greater power or toughness, so you're not going to be whiffing off of this often. And it's just a pretty good big creature to have access to. So Rootless U is one to pay attention to. And then we've got Arnie Slays the Troll is the saga, which sort of pays you off for having big creatures, because the first step, that's red and a green, and the first step is that one of your creatures fights one of your opponent's creatures, or creature you don't control. So yeah, target creature you control fights up to one target creature you don't control. This can kill something. It can also just trade, but it'll often kill something. Step 2, add a red mana. Put 2+1/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature you control. This mode is pretty huge, you're not often going to be playing this on turn 2 because you're not going to get a lot out of the first mode, but on if you play this on turn 3 on your 2-drop, then on going into turn 4, to start turn 4, you're adding another mana, so you can play a 5-drop this turn, and you are putting, you're making one of your guys bigger. And then step 3, you gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So if you still got that thing with 4 or 5 power lying around, this goes out with a little bit of life gain. So I would say this is definitely worth the mana cost. You got to know when to play it, but it's pretty good. So I also put Open the Omen Paths on here because it does let you ramp into a big creature early. It's an instant for 2 and a red. Choose 1, add 2 mana of any one color and 2 mana of any other color. Spend this mana only to cast creature or enchantment spells. So, I guess you can get to a Saga early, or you can cast a creature spell. And then you've got creatures you control get +1/0 until end of turn. So, if for some reason that's going to be the difference between you winning and losing, or if you top deck this and you don't have any creatures to cast off of the ramp, then you've at least got a crappy Go Wide Pump spell. And then we've got Horizon Seeker, which is 2 and a green for a 3/2 human warrior with Boast. For 1 and a green, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. You're often going to swing with this, see that it's going to trade, and then just Boast. Grab a basic land. You traded, and this replaced itself with a basic land. And what more are you going to ask out of your 3-mana 3/2? Not much. So this is a great common. It's on curve. A 3-mana 3/2 is pretty good, vanilla test-wise. And you get to grab a basic land if you swing with it, which, it's not like it's going to get eaten the turn it can swing. It's going to maybe get traded with, but you still get to Boast after they block, grab your basic land, and then do the rest of your turn. So nothing wrong with Horizon Seeker. Searching for a basic land is also extra helpful if you're playing a snow deck, because it puts that snow into your hand where you might need it, because a lot of these snow cards activate after you have 2 snow lands out. So anything that fetches a basic land gains the extra utility of fetching your snow lands. Worth noting. And then the last ally color pair is green-white, which is playing a sort of tokens deck. And we've got Maya, Bredagard Protector, which is 2 a green and double white for a 2/3 legendary human warrior. Other creatures you control get +1/+1, but not her, remember that. And whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 white human warrior creature token. That's pretty alright. Landfall, you get a 1/1, which is a 2/2 for as long as you still have her. My concern is that this gets removed, and then, you maybe got a 1/1 off of it, or maybe not. Maybe it didn't do anything, and it's easy to remove with only 3 toughness. But if this doesn't get removed, it's pretty good. You're getting some 1/1s, you're getting an Anthem for your team. It's also good just to play on a turn where you plan to have a big swing, so if they are tapped out, you're going to at least get the +1/+1, and then they have to kill this, or you're still going to have it. It's going to stick around. So, yeah, decent card. Elven Bow is a green. When it enters the battlefield, you can pay 2. If you do create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token, then attach Elven Bow to it. An equipped creature gets +1/+2 and has reach. So, look at this as a 3, and it's got equipped for 3, but look at this as a 3-mana 2/3 reach creature, which is not excellent, but the fact that it equips for 3 later, maybe onto something with a keyword ability like lifelink or flying, and allows you to hit for more damage, this sticks around. This is more than just a 3-mana 2/3 reach, but that is how you should pretty much always play it. This is not worth just dropping down as an equipment. But, yeah, it makes a token, it attaches to another token later, makes them a little bigger. This sort of living weapon style gameplay, living weapon, has proven to be pretty good and limited. And this is, for all intents and purposes, a living weapon. And we've got Valor of the Worthy, which is a white for an enchantment aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and when that creature leaves the battlefield, you get a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So it's a slight buff, but you get a flyer when it dies, and I would think of this as definitely worth way more than the mana cost. You slap it on a creature, and then that creature just has to leave the battlefield in order for you to spirit. Does it get bounced? You get a spirit. If it gets exiled, you get a spirit. If it dies, you get a spirit. So, you don't have to, you're not beholden to what type of removal your opponent wants to choose to use. You just get the spirit, which is really helpful. So, Valor of the Worthy, definitely a good pickup for this deck. You can slap a spirit down. And then we've got Fall of the Imposter, which is the one of the best sagas in this set, I think. And this is the saga for green-white tokens, which is 1 a green and a white. Steps 1 and 2 are each put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. And then step 3 is exile a creature with the greatest power among creatures target opponent controls. So you have to be able to target your opponent, but you don't have to be able to target the creature, and you still get to pick if there's a tie. which gets her on hexproof, although there's not any hexproof in this set, I don't think. At least at common and uncommon that I remember. But yeah, you get to exile your opponent's thing after putting some counters on your guys. So the counters on your guys, you're not going to feel them immediately, but it's either going to slow your opponent's game plan down because they're afraid to play their big guy and you get to get in aggressively with those creatures you're putting the counters on, or they have to play their guy and just bite the bullet on the fact that it's going to get exiled by the third mode of the spell. So definitely very, very strong. Guardian Gladewalker is a 2-mana 1/1 changeling. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So, this can synergize whatever little synergies you have with like elves or humans or whatever. But the big thing is, this is either a 2-mana 2/2 or it's a 2-mana 1/1, and you get to put a counter on your spirit token, your flyer, something with lifelink. This is a creature that lets you kind of distribute half of its stats, which is pretty helpful. And we've got Clarion Spirit. Now this also fits into White-Black's theme of casting 2 spells a turn, because that's the circumstances under which its ability triggers. It's 1 and a white for a 2/2. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. That's pretty good. You're pumping out flyers. Foretell helps with this a little bit in that, like, if you foretold something, it's easier to have a turn where you're playing more than one spell. But like this deck is going to want to play a lot of cheap creatures anyway. So, turn 5, you play your Guardian Gladewalker and your Fall of the Imposter, and then you get a 1/1 white spirit on top of that for free. So, definitely not the worst thing you can be doing for 2 mana. Probably one of the best things you can be doing for 2 mana, in fact, in this set. I'm going to get a glass of water before we discuss the enemy color pairs. 1 second. Alright, so green-black is Elf Tribal. And we've got Harald, King of Skemfar. He is 1, a black and a green, and he's a 3/2 legendary elf warrior with menace. And when he enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an elf, warrior, or Tyvar card from among them. He's the new planeswalker, and put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, yeah, he's a... he's a creature on curve with evasion, and he looks at the top 5 and grabs an elf, warrior, or Tyvar. And that's not too hard to hit. You're probably not going to whiff that in Limited if you really focus on drafting the best elves in this set. When you whiff, it's going to feel pretty bad, but it's not going to feel that bad because you still played an on-curve creature with evasion. Skemfar Shadow Sage is 3 and a black for a 2/5 elf cleric. When it enters the battlefield, choose one. Each opponent loses X life, where X is the greatest number of creature types you control that have creatures you control that have a creature type in common, or you gain that much life. You get to choose if they lose or you gain, whatever is more relevant. He's a decent blocker. They look to be a little bit below curve in terms of being a 2/5 for 4 instead of like a 2/6 or a 3/5. But they're at least going to lose 1 life, or you're going to gain 1 life. That's the floor. But if you have another cleric, it's 2. If you have another elf, it's 2. If you have 2 more elves, it's 3. Or if for some reason you have like 5 bears, then it's 5, because it doesn't have to be its own creature type. This is an interesting form of tribal where, like, obviously you're going to want to play it in an elf deck or, like, I guess a cleric deck so that you can maximize, so that you can count Skemfar Shadow Sage among them. But in the event that that's not the thing that happens to be what you have the most of, you still get to drain them a little. So definitely a card to look out for. Roots of Wisdom is 1 and a green. Mill 3 cards, then return a land card or an elf card from your graveyard to your hand. If you can't, draw a card. So if you have to play this on turn 2 and you don't happen to mill a land or an elf, you get to draw a card. You don't just lose. You don't just have your 2-drop do nothing, basically. Which is kind of them, but the likelihood of that happening is pretty low anyway. But milling 3 cards, and then you get either a land, which is going to make it a little easier to get snow together if you need snow, or you can get an elf. You can get Harald. Which is an uncommon, so maybe you can draft 2 copies of him. You can get that Skemfar Shadow Sage. You can get the 4-mana 3/3 that makes a 1/1 when it comes in, or 4-mana 3/2 that makes a 1/1 when it comes in. There's a lot of stuff you can get off of Roots of Wisdom, and it's a nice thing to draw in the late game because it's not just a draw spell; it's another copy of whatever the best elf you played that game that died was. So definitely good to get. Binding of the Old Gods is the Saga, and I'll be honest, this doesn't have much to do with elves, other than the last mode maybe synergizing with elf tokens, if you want to wrap your head around it that way. But this is such a good card. You're going to want it if you're in this color pair. You're going to go into one of these colors if you see this and you're in one of the other color. 2 a black and a green. Step 1, destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. That doesn't say creature. It just says non-land permanent. As artifacts, enchantments. If they drafted a planeswalker, that's gonzo. Step 2, search your library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. If you're trying to make some Sultai Snow thing work, you get to grab a tapped Snow Duel. You get to grab a Snow Forest. Or just, worst case scenario, a basic forest. Or, if you're drafting this Elves deck, you can get the black-green forest and put that in tapped, because those duels do have basic land subtypes. So that's kind of crazy. And then step 3, creatures you control gain Death Touch until end of turn. So probably the least relevant mode on this powerhouse of a card. But if you have like 3/1/1 those 1/1 green Elf Warrior creature tokens that a lot of these cards can make, and you give them Death Touch, it's not like your opponent's going to feel happy about blocking them this turn. They're not going to block them that turn. So you get in some extra free damage with that third step on the Saga. So Binding the Old Gods, I think, is definitely one of the strongest cards in the set. Not even like taking into account its rarity. Like, I think this goes toe to toe with a lot of like the mythics and stuff in the set. But yeah, Binding the Old Gods, very good to have in limited. If you're in these colors, if not, kind of pivot into them. This card's great. Next, we've got Return Upon the Tide, which is 4 and a black for a sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it's an elf, create 2 1/1 green Elf Warrior creature tokens. And this foretells for 3 and a black, so you're not getting much of a discount there. But the awesome thing is, you get Herald, and you pay 2 extra mana for them. You got 2 extra 1/1s, which at that stage in the game is going to be a plus. Get the Elderleaf Mentor, and you're going to get 3 1/1s and a 3/2 for 5 mana, which is pretty good. This is a flexible card. And even if it's not returning an elf, you can return the Lindworm with this, and then your opponent just has to deal with it again. So this is a card with elf synergy, but that doesn't absolutely demand that you return an elf if you have a better creature in your graveyard. And lastly, we've got Elderleaf Mentor, 3 and a green for a 3/2 Elf Warrior. When it comes in, you get a 1/1 green Elf Warrior creature token. So it's a 3/2 and a 1/1. They're both elves for your elf synergy. What's there to hate? You block and trade with a 4/4. You can block a lot of things and trade with them with this and keep the 1/1 for whatever it's useful for. Maybe you got some sack outlets or something, or you just have a go wide option later. So definitely very cool. Elf Tribal, something to keep an eye on. Binding the Old Gods is just really strong on its own. If you're playing black, you might splash green for that, or vice versa. Then we've got Black-White Double Spell. This is the most confused color pair because it's also kind of Angel Tribal, especially once we look at the Saga, but I'm going to read these cards to you. I don't have a lot of faith in this. Furia, Judge of Valor, is 2 a white and double black for a 2/4 legendary Angel Cleric with flying and lifelink. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them in your hand and the rest in your graveyard. This does not feel like a black-white card at all. That effect feels pretty blue, or maybe red. I don't know. This feels like a color pie bend in an uncomfortable way. But it's a good card. 2/4 flying lifelink for 5 isn't anything to sneeze at. And the cool thing is, the next turn you'll probably be able to cast 2 spells, and then you'll get to dig and grab an extra card. So, at that point, you're definitely getting what you want to off of this card. We've next got Doomscar Oracle, which is 2 and a white for a 3/2. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you gain 2 life. I feel like I talked about this one in the blue-white. That's my bad. But it's got Foretell. Or no, I talked about this in the explaining what Foretell does. And then it's got Foretell for a white. So it's a 3/2. And you get to sort of... it's very easy to make sure that if you foretell this on turn 2, on turn 3 you can play this and then a 2-drop, and then you instantly gain the 2 life, and you got 3/2. Life is good. There's a lot of situations where this card gives you a little more than you're paying for, which is nice. Infernal Pet is a 3 mana 2/2. It's 2 and a black for an imp. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Infernal Pet, and it gains flying until end of turn. So that's pretty good. The more that you do it, the bigger it gets, but even just doing it once makes it a 3/3 flyer for 3. And then on turns after that, it's just a 3/3, but doing it twice makes it a 4/4 flyer that you paid 3/4. So definitely very strong there. Infernal Pet is one you're going to want to look out for in this black-white double spell deck. Next, we've got Ascent of the Worthy, which doesn't have any double spell synergy, but it's the Black-White Saga. 1, a white, and a black. Step 1 and 2 are choose a creature you control. Until your next turn, all damage that would be dealt to creatures you control is dealt to that creature instead. So you can pick one of your 1/1 human tokens or whatever and just make it the target of all the damage your other creatures would take. You know, it's sort of the martyr for your cause, which does grant you safety to swing out, which is really helpful in like an aggressive stinted deck. It's also not, it eats damage-based removal, which can be, you know, situationally relevant if they don't have an instant speed version to target it with in response. So that's cool. And then we've got step 3, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a flying counter on it. That card is an Angel Warrior in addition to its other types. So this is a Reanimator spell, kind of like one of the other sagas we saw. It's flying forever. We see the flying counters from Ikoria return. They become an Angel Warrior, so for the few like Angel Tribal cards that are in this set, that matters, which is very nice. And yeah, I mean, there's not much to say about this card other than it's pretty clearly good. You know, worst case scenario, you're returning some sort of chump creature from early in the game that you used one of those first 2 modes on, but I mean, that's not even that bad. Like, you know, it gets flying. It's just back with flying for the rest of the game. So definitely not something to sneeze at. Codespell Cleric is a white for a 1/1 Vigilance human cleric. When Codespell Cleric enters the battlefield, if it was the second spell you cast this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So you're going to be looking to cast this when you're 1 behind curve, and you're either going to get a free or a 1-mana 2/2 Vigilance, or whatever creature you played kind of behind curve is going to become an on-curve creature, and you're going to get a 1/1 Vigilance on the side. Is the way that I would look at it. So, like, let's say it's turn 5, you've got a 4-drop creature, and then this, you know, you play your 4-mana 4/4, and then boom, this guy comes down, makes it a 5/5, which is what you should be playing on turn 5 in an ideal game, and you get a 1/1 Vigilance on the side. You know, you can use it on Ascent of the Worthy, or, you know, sack it to something, or just chump later in the game if you need to. So very helpful there. And then we've got Bloodski Berserker, which is 1 and a black for a 1/1 human Berserker. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Bloodski Berserker. It gains Menace until end of turn. So even just activating this once, like casting 2 spells on turn 3, is going to make Bloodski Berserker a 3/3 with Menace for the turn. So it's already better than you paid for it, and a 2-mana 3/3 is huge in Limited. You know, ignoring that Menace, like pretend you're never going to give it Menace again or put any more counters on it, it's still excellent. So one of the best uncommons to grab for this deck, but also just like any black deck, it's really not that hard to cast a second spell on your turn, and the ceiling on this card is so high, and the floor is not awful either. Like, either they're going to remove it because they're scared of it, or you're going to get to put at least 2 counters on it. So Bloodski Berserker is excellent black card in this set. And then we've got white-red equipment. Cole the Forge Master is the legendary uncommon for this archetype, and it is a red and a white. He is a red and a white for a 2/2 Dwarf Warrior, legendary. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, if it was enchanted or equipped, return it to its owner's hand, and creature tokens you control that are enchanted or equipped get +1/+1. So there's immediately some synergy here with the cycle of sort of living weapon equipments in the set that let you pay an extra cost and they come down with a creature to attach them to. And that's like it automatically attaches. And those are really good with this guy because those tokens are immediately going to get +1/+1. But, you know, all of your little dudes that you manage to slap an equipment on, if they die before this guy does, you get them back and you get to just play them again, and that's huge. It basically means that if your opponent has targeted spot removal, they have no choice but to play it on Cole. Otherwise, whatever they hit with it is just going to go back to your hand, and you're going to just play it again. So, you know, he's a magnet for removal in a deck that, like, gets set behind pretty bad if its creatures get removed. Because you need stuff to put equipment on. We got Tormentor's Helm, which is a red for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever a equipped creature becomes blocked, it deals 1 damage to defending player, and this equips for 1. So it's, you know, slightly better short sword, but only in red. And this is just, you know, going to be the cheapest way to put an equipment on your creatures so that they get benefits from your cards that give you bonuses for equipment or auras. So Cole, for example, like, you need your creature to get Cole's benefit as quickly as possible. This is the cheapest way to do it. Master Scald. Master Scald is a 4 mana, 4 and a white for a 4/4 dwarf warrior. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So if your opponent has managed to remove one of your equipments, or if just an aura fell off or a creature with an aura died earlier, you can do the pretty minimal cost of exiling a creature from your graveyard. In fact, that's basically nothing. To return that card from your graveyard to your hand, and this can be huge in the case of like an aura or an equipment that makes a token when it comes in. And this is a 5 mana 4/4, which you're pretty happy with just playing that on turn 5. As you get up in the curve, it matters a little bit less that you're behind curve because you just need to be playing a big creature. So Master Scald is really good. Going to be really helpful in those decks for when your stuff does get removed. And then we got the Saga for white-red equipment, which is Forging the Tyrite Sword. Worth noting, she can also bring back Forging the Tyrite Sword because it just says artifact or whoops. It just says artifact or enchantment. It just says artifact or enchantment, not specifically equipment or aura. And sorry about that, y'all. I was trying to go back a slide, and I accidentally went forward all of the slides. Okay, so that was Master Scald. Forging the Tyrite Sword is 1 a red and a white. The first 2 modes are just creative treasure tokens, so you're going to be able to ramp out something big if you really need to. But the third mode is search your library for a card named Halvar, God of Battle, or an equipment card. Reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So you can grab, if you drafted 1 or 2 of those living weapon sort of equipments, or if you got the rune crown that lets you fetch a rune and attach it to it when it comes in, like that sort of thing. Then this grabs that, and then you can probably immediately play it and equip it to something with the amount of mana that you'll have, especially off of those treasure tokens. So this really puts you ahead in terms of, like, if you have equipment you're really excited about playing in your deck, then Forging the Tyrite Sword will make sure that you have access to it as often as possible. So good to have 1 or 2 copies of, but definitely not the strongest uncommon Saga available to you in this set. Dwarven Hammer is 2 and a red for an equipment. When it enters the battlefield, you can pay 2. If you do, create a 2/1 red Dwarf Berserker creature token, then attach Dwarven Hammer to it. Equipped creature gets +3/0 and has trample, and this equips for 3. So for those counting at home, that's a 5 mana 5/1, and then later you can equip this for 3 and give any equipped creature +3/0 and trample, which, as it stands, there's a few ways to do 1 damage to creatures with 1 toughness, and if you run into this, you paid 5 mana for a creature that can die to one of those things. There's the one with Boast that deals 1 damage to something, and that feels awful. I think you're pretty okay with, playing the dwarf, paying 5 for this and getting the dwarf and trading it with something. And then later you slap this on something with lifelink, and it's going to trade with anything. It's going to maybe do a little extra damage over to your opponent, and you're going to be gaining a lot of life. You're going to be sitting pretty. You slap this on a flyer, that is a mean clock. So Dwarven Hammer, as at least a 1 of in a lot of these decks, is going to be finishing games for you. Very valuable to draft. And then lastly, we've got Starnheim Courser. 2 and a white for a 2/2 flyer, which is on rate. A 2/2 flyer for 3 is never something to turn your nose up at. But it also has artifact and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Not only does this affect equipments and auras, including the ones that have pseudo-living weapon, it also affects sagas. So Forging the Tyrite Sword is only a 2-drop with Starnheim Courser. And it's a good target for your equipments and auras as well, because it's a flyer. So anything, any way that you boost its stats, you're going to be gaining the advantage of boosting the stats of a creature with evasion instead of just a regular creature. So, this synergizes with runes, it synergizes with equipments, it synergizes with these sagas. So Starnheim Courser is a very good card to keep an eye out for in this deck. We have 2 archetypes left. The second to last one is Red-Blue Giants / Prowess. This one's a little weird, but I think it can come together with the good common giants. So Agar the Freezing Flame is your legendary. It's 1 a blue and a red for a 3/3 legendary giant wizard. Whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess damage, so more damage than needs to be dealt in order to kill it, if a giant, wizard, or spell you control dealt damage to it this turn, draw a card. So basically, if you do excess damage with a giant, a wizard, or a spell, you get to draw a card. That's pretty good. And it's a 3-mana 3/3, so, like, just the threat of this having not really trample, but instead of, like, trampling over, I get to deal more damage, or I get to draw a card, makes this better than just a 3-mana 3/3, because it does trigger off of itself. If this gets blocked by, like, a 3/2, then it, replaces itself. I know I said the card was nothing to sneeze at, but sorry about that. And then we've got Glimpse the Cosmos, which is a lot of text for Anticipate. It's 1 and a blue for a sorcery speed Anticipate, which is look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand and the rest on the bottom in any order. As long as you control a giant, you may cast Glimpse the Cosmos from your graveyard by paying a blue rather than paying its mana cost. If you cast Glimpse the Cosmos this way and it would be put in your graveyard, exile it instead. So, flashback for a 1 blue as long as you control a giant, and that's the real text on this card. If a blue-red Giants deck exists, I would have a hard time believing it wouldn't play 4 copies of this just because, casting this and then immediately casting again for 1. And you got to remember in Standard, like, Bone Crusher Giant exists, but we're not here to talk about Standard, we're not here to talk about Constructed. In Limited, Sorcery Speed Anticipate is usually toward the bottom of the list. You'd rather just kind of play the card that you want to get off of it. By the time you're actually casting that card, you probably would have drawn through those 3 cards anyway. But if you think you can consistently cast this twice, if you're going to be playing this on turn 2, Agar or some other 3-drop giant on turn 3, turn 4, flashing this back and playing something else, then it's amazing. If you think you're going to be able to flash this back at all, I would say it's definitely worth getting in Limited. I would want 1 or 2 copies of this in the Blue-Red Giants deck. So Glimpse the Cosmos, pretty good to look out for. Basalt Ravager, 3 and a red for a 4/2 giant wizard. When Basalt Ravager enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common. So, if you don't have any other creatures, or if all of your other creatures are all different types, this just does 1 when it comes in, which is still not nothing. You can kill something with 1 toughness, which there's a lot of in the set, or you can ping your opponent for 1. That's the floor. The ceiling of this is probably a Flame Tongue Kavu, which is one of the best cards you can get in Limited. But consider just you have another giant or another wizard out. You play this down, you get to shock something. This is a 4-mana 4/2 that shocks something, which is really strong. So Basalt Ravager, I think, is one of the better uncommons in the set. You're never going to be mad to play a 4-mana 4/2 and kill like their bear that they played earlier. Basalt Ravager is definitely going to be one of the better cards, I think, to pick up in Limited. Even if you're not in the giant tribal, Giant's Prowess sort of mindset, this is just a good card to have. So we've got the Saga, Invasion of the Giants, which is going to help you cast some of these expensive dudes. So it's a blue and a red, and the first mode is just Scry 2. So it doesn't do really anything for the board the turn it comes down. But Scrying 2 is helpful. It helps you dig for the giant that you're going to want to have in your hand for the rest of this saga to do its thing. So step 2 is draw a card. Then you may reveal a giant card from your hand. When you do, Invasion of the Giants deals 2 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. So you can't get rid of a creature with this. Not a lot of planeswalkers in Limited, but you can hit your opponent in the face for 2. That's not bad. Would you play a blue and a red for Scry 2, draw a card, hit your opponent in the face for 2? Debatable. Step 3, the next giant spell you cast this turn costs 2 less to cast. Now there's the hotness. If you're playing this on turn 2, then that is going to trigger on turn 4, which is going to allow you to play basically up to a 6-drop giant, if everything has sort of gone according to plan. And that's a pretty meaningful thing to be doing on turn 4. But if you play this later in the game, you could be casting big guys that you just don't have the mana for, normally. I would say this is not one of the better uncommon sagas, but if you're playing the Giants deck, I wouldn't sneeze at having a couple copies of this in there to use. Next, we've got Frostpyre Arcanist. Now, this is 4 and a blue for a 2/5 giant wizard, so pretty much all the giants we've seen so far are wizards, and that's not the case for literally every giant in the set, but it is for most of them. But this guy costs 1 less if you control a giant or wizard. So if you already control a giant or a wizard, this is a 4-mana 2/5, which is slightly below curve, but get this. When Frostpyre Arcanist enters the battlefield, search your library for an instant or sorcery card with the same name as a card in your graveyard, reveal it and put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So you immediately want to start thinking about what the best common instants and sorceries are in the set. And if you can draft one of these, you want to be conscious of what instants and sorceries you've already drafted, so that when you play this guy, you get a free sort of tutor for a removal spell off of it. The floor on this card is abysmal. The floor on this card is a 5-mana 2/5, and you don't have any duplicates of instants or sorceries in your yard. Which is not super good. I have to ban a bot from my chat. The floor on this card's awful. Not very good. But the ceiling on this card, 4-mana 2/5, even just 5-mana 2/5 that tutors for a removal spell, you will have room for as many of those as your deck can handle. Very good. And then we've got Squash, the giant-themed removal spell, which is 4 and a red for an instant. Costs 3 less to cast if you control a giant. So if you control a giant, it's only 2 mana for instant. Squash deals 6 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. If you don't control a giant, it's on curve. If you control a giant, you're going to be able to kill something and do something else with the rest of your turn. But there's no like really cheap giants. There's not like a 2-drop giant in the set. The cheapest one is 3. So Squash is going to be a little hard to get that cost reduced. But if you get that cost reduced, this is insane. Very good. So keep your eye out for a couple copies of these. This is a great thing to pair with Frostpire Arcanist. If you can draft a few Squashes to make it most likely that you will get to fetch an extra removal spell off of Frostpire Arcanist, then the Arcanist also provides you the cost reduction on Squash. So little synergy there. And now we move into the last, but definitely not least, archetype in this limited format. Blue-green Snow Ramp. So you saw blue-black Snow Control, and this has quite a bit in common with that archetype in terms of what cards you're going to want to get for it. But and a Sultai Snow deck, I think, is probably going to be the best potential 3-color draft deck in this format. But Morite of the Frost is 2 a green and double blue for a legendary snow creature, Shapeshifter. Now, it's a 0/0 normally. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of a permanent you control, except it's legendary and snow in addition to its other types, and if it's a creature, it enters with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it and has Changeling. So, interesting thing here. You get a copy of another creature you control, but with 2 extra counters, which is usually pretty good for 5 mana. And then if you have stuff that benefits off of snow synergies, then this remains a snow permanent, even when it is a copy of something that's not a snow permanent. So one of the weirder, harder to build around sort of blue-green or multicolored legendaries in the set at Uncommon, but pretty good. And then we've got Spirit of the Alderguard, 3 and a green for an 0/4 Bear Spirit. I think this card's getting slept on. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a Snowland card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Spirit of the Alderguard gets +1/0 for each other snow permanent you control. So, this guy will come down and often will just be like a 1/4, but it immediately grabs either a basic Snowland or one of those tapped dual Snowlands if you were able to draft one. So very cool, very powerful. 4-mana 2/4 is not great, but a 4-mana 2/4 that grabbed you a Snowland, which is going to enable you to play the effects that require snow mana in your deck later on, and is just going to bump up the power of this. Nothing wrong with that. Or it's going to fix you if you're in a 3-color deck and you were able to draft a snow duel in your colors. Nothing to turn your nose up at. I think Spirit of the Alderguard's definitely got chops and limited. Avalanche Caller is a 1 and a blue snow creature human wizard. It's a 1/3. And for 2 mana, target snowland you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with hexproof and haste until end of turn. Which, that's pretty powerful. On turn 3, right after you play this, you can activate it on a snowland you control and swing 4. And there's, this card lets you go aggressive, or it just lets you make sure you have a little bit of threat late in the game. And of course, if they answer this guy, then your Snowland isn't a creature anymore because the ability only lasts till end of turn. But if they don't answer this guy, you get to hit him for 4 a few times, which is pretty powerful if you've got a Snowland. Which as you see, there's a few ways to grab one. Speaking of ways to grab Snowlands, the Blue-Green Saga is the 3 seasons total landscaping. It's a green and a blue, for step 1, mill 3 cards. It doesn't really do anything on its own, but hear me out. We'll see what the other 2 modes do. Step 2, return up to 2 target snow permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. There it is. In Constructed, this is insane. It's always going to hit 2 things. But in Limited, ideally, if you play, especially if you're playing this later, you're going to be able to hit a creature and a snowland. All right. Playing this on turn 2 is very risky because, you're not even guaranteed to get 1 in the top 3 cards. And then the third mode is choose 3 cards in each graveyard. Their owners shuffle those cards into their libraries. So late in the game, this can be really helpful, especially just given that, you're going to have some bombs that maybe went in the yard that you might like to play again if the game's going long, and you can put those back in, and then you can look at your opponent's yard, and if they've got any, lands in there, they're absolutely not going to want to draw those later. So being able to shuffle those up is going to maybe mess with their game plan later, maybe sort of disrupt the consistency of their deck. So the 3 Seasons is, I think, sneakily powerful, but it's definitely better late game. You do not want to play it on turn 2 in Limited. Sculptor of Winter is 1 and a green for a 2/2 snow creature, Elf Rogue. Tap, untap target snowland. So this is a bear that can tap to untap a snowland, and it doesn't, it's worth noting that in Limited, you're not always going to have a snowland on turn 2 when you play this guy, so sometimes it is just going to be a 2-mana 2/2. But if you have that snowland, this is a 2-mana 2/2 that taps for mana, which is pretty great in Limited. So definitely something to keep in mind. And then Icebind Pillar is, this is equally good in the snow control deck, but this is just kind of a piece of removal. It's 2 and a blue for a snow artifact. Pay a snow and tap this to tap target artifact or creature. So on your opponent's turn, you can tap their creature, you can tap their Icebind Pillar to sort of force them to use it immediately. This card literally does nothing if you don't have a snowland, so, don't play this if you were only able to draft 1 snowland, because you're probably not going to be able to get it going. But if you drafted a few snowlands, especially if you've got the bear that grabs them, or a 3 Seasons to try to search for them, if you've got a way to grab your snowlands, then Icebind Pillar is going to be very good to you. Think Icy Manipulator levels of good and Limited, because you can be tapping their biggest thing every turn, and then if they play a bigger thing, just start tapping that instead. And once you kill the thing that you've been tapping, you get to start tapping whatever their next biggest thing is. So it's a very, very flexible form of sort of removal. With that said, I think we're going to be wrapping it up now. I appreciate you all hanging out, and this will be uploaded on Stevensville Gamers on YouTube. So if you would like to see it there and sort of examine it further for your before your pre-release, which, not a lot of pre-releases because of COVID, but for your drafts on Arena or your sealed on Arena, feel free to do so. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for hanging out with me while I went through my set review. Goodbye.